This is exactly what addendums are for. It's your space to be specific about your property rules and criteria. And another great example is about pets. This is where you would state your fees for pets. The breed, the size, the type of animal goes here, as well as any rules about how the animal is to be contained. So if you want dogs to be crated when the tenant is not home, or snakes to remain in a tank, or you only allow fish tanks up to 1 gallon, this is where any and all criteria and rules about pets should go. This is also important to know that this is exactly what addendums are for on single family homes versus apartment living. This is why addendums are specific to the property. Welcome to your Landlord Resource Podcast. Many moons ago, when I started as a landlord, I was as green as it gets. I may have had my real estate license, but I lacked confidence and the hands-on experience needed when it came to dealing with tenants, leases, maintenance, and bookkeeping. After many failed attempts, fast forward to today, Kevin and I have doubled our doors and created an organized, professionally operated rental property business. Want to go from overwhelmed to confident? If you're an ambitious landlord or maybe one in the making, join us as we provide strategies and teach actionable steps to help you reach your goals and the lifestyle you desire, all while building a streamlined and profitable rental property business. This is your Landlord Resource Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Your Landlord Resource Podcast. This is Stacy, and I'm here with my husband and partner in crime, Kevin. And oh my goodness, we are thrilled you are joining us today on part 3 of our 3-part series, or should I say mini masterclass, all about leases and addendums.
Yeah, you got that right. I mean, it's been a couple weeks now of talking about the main body of the lease and what should be included in that.
It has, but I think it's been great. It's very informative. The lease and any addendums that are added are one of the most important parts of owning rental property. Okay, Kev, what is the most important thing a landlord must do for their rental property?
Boy, a question really early. All right. So besides the lease, right?
Yes, that's at the top of importance, but there's one that tops that.
Okay. My answer is your tenant, or more specifically, placing your tenant.
Yep. The criteria and the background check are the most important things that you are going to do for your rental property business, people.
Are we going to be doing a podcast on it?
Soon, yeah. But more importantly, we're working on creating a course that teaches the processes that we use. And we're so excited to share that sometime in the early part of 2024.
That we are. I'm actually really looking forward to that. That's going to be fun, I think. In case you didn't realize from listening to our podcast, Stacy really likes to be detailed in the information she shares with you. We could roll through a lot of these topics and subjects quickly, but that just leaves everyone with a lot of questions. So when we do our outlines for the show, we have a lot of detail to try and help you answer questions you might have.
Exactly. So, landlords, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, shoot us an email. We'll link our emails in the show notes. We're going to be doing a Q&A or a question and answer episode soon, and we'd love to answer your questions on that episode.
Yeah, I imagine we'll get quite a few. We've actually gotten some already, so let's see what else we can do to help out our listeners. Okay, we're going to switch gears here. We know the last 2 episodes was a lot of information to understand, and we appreciate you sticking with us this far, but now we're on to talk about addendums. The following items are all things likely in some capacity, addressed in the body of the lease, but you may need an additional addendum to designate any additional or specific notes regarding the subject. So, the body of your basic lease is the information that would be applicable for all of your properties, your core policies. Addendums are customizable to an individual property. So we have a core lease, which is all of the base lease sections and clauses we have been discussing in episodes 32 and 33 on this podcast. And for each property, we will use whichever addendums are applicable to that particular property. With that said, let's talk about items that need to be addressed in the body of the lease, and depending on the situation for your particular property, issues that may better be described and detailed in an addendum. Let's start with parking. You must indicate if parking is available or not. If it is, it's wise to indicate any limitations that come with that parking. Specific information regarding terms like how many parking spaces are they allowed to park in, where they can or cannot park, your policies on trailers, boats, or motorhome parking, if you allow them to work on their vehicles in their designated parking spaces, if there are any fees for leaving oil stains, etc. All should be noted in the body of the lease or in an addendum. Your storage policy is the same thing. Do you have designated storage for the tenants to use? Like, is there a shed in the backyard of the single-family home the tenant has access to? Or do you have storage lockers available to rent at your multifamily property? Or can they use the garage for storage? This is also where you would notate what can and cannot be stored, like explosives or flammable liquid or materials. We have it noted they cannot store any items on or under their porch. Like with parking, if there are specific requirements regarding use of storage, create an addendum for that and indicate it in the body of the lease for them to refer to that addendum. Use of garages are often linked with storage addendums, which makes sense given people use garages to store their cars and other items. We know many landlords who have garages, storage sheds, and even driveways they don't allow their tenants to use. So that's where addendums come in super handy.
Yeah, like Kevin said, these addendums are where you can add in criteria based on a specific property, like asbestos. We include this addendum for all California properties that were built before 1980. Asbestos was banned in 1977, but we found out that many contractors continued to use their stock materials for a couple years past that, so we pad the date. This addendum is not needed for homes built after 1980, but we use a formatted addendum that has checkboxes. So it'll state that asbestos is located in the house, is not located, and the owner has reports to prove it, or it may be, but there's no reports either way. And that last one, the one that says it may be, is the one we check on all our leases unless the owner has done a full remediation and has a report to prove that it was all removed.
Which basically means the rental property was remodeled from the studs up and they took the time and expense to have a formal report written, which is really pretty rare.
Right. Which is why we just say that we don't know, even if we're fairly certain that there is none. The same exact thing goes for lead-based paint. We have a pre-formatted page that states it is not, or it may be present in the home. And like Kevin said, unless the property was demoed down to studs, it's likely there could be lead there somewhere.
And California requires that we provide a booklet to all our tenants about where they can find lead in a home. So there's a checkbox on the bottom of the page where we have to indicate that we have given the booklet to the tenant.
Yeah, and we don't actually print the 20-page booklet. We just provide a link in our initial email when we send the lease over for their review. We have to do the same with Prop 65, which is about drinking water in California. Additionally, we provide these links via QR codes in the tenant binder that we leave at the unit during move-in. If needed, you should provide an addendum with any CC&Rs that are attached to the rental property. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions are most common with HOAs and condo rentals, and will address such things as rules about landscaping, exterior paint colors, parking, inoperable cars, political signs, limits on lights and decorations during holidays, and things like that. So even though it's pretty much stated in the body of the lease, we do include a separate addendum about unlawful activities. This one is much more detailed and defines all criminal activities we consider a material violation of the lease and cause for termination of tenancy.
Yeah, that is pretty much a cover our butts clause so they can't come back and say they didn't know. So we include an addendum about our smoking policy as well. The body of the lease is written where it states there is no smoking inside the property. But we like to take it one step further and use an addendum that prohibits smoking of any kind anywhere on our properties, including units and common areas.
Yeah, the addendum that we use does have checkboxes where we can specify between cigarettes, tobacco, e cigarettes, or vaping. But we don't allow any of it on the property, so we just check the one that it's not allowed anywhere.
Yeah, that was updated last year, I believe, to include vaping.
It was.
So it might be rare now, but we have an addendum that we have criteria set up for satellite dishes and antennas. This is because 10 to 15 years ago, when satellite dishes were in their prime, the contracted installers really screwed up the exterior of our property when putting them in. Not only did they wreak havoc on the siding, often these installers were unlicensed and inexperienced to be up on our roofs. If a tenant had one installed and the installer fell off the roof, the injuries were the liability of the property owner, not the tenant. So our addendum basically states the tenant has to provide an additional $1,000 security deposit, plus the company installing the dish has to add us on as additional insured and show they have at least $1 million in liability coverage.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to use this addendum until dishes are no longer used. It's one page that covers us and puts major restrictions on installation and makes the tenant really have to work to get that dish installed.
Exactly. Do what you must to deter a tenant from damaging your property or creating a potential liability situation. The next one we use on our single family home rentals is for landscaping. Now, we touched on this a little bit in the last episode, but if there is anything that a tenant needs to be responsible for, this is where you're going to put that in your criteria. Such things as the grass cannot grow taller than 6 inches, they can or cannot use the planter boxes, or if you require they water the landscaping and how often. If you do not want them to alter the landscaping, it needs to be specifically written down in your addendums. The same goes for grilling. We absolutely use a grilling addendum in all of our leases. We do so to specify where they can safely grill and what kind of grill they can use. We have a family member with a rental that has a wood deck. Off that deck, they have a small gravel area on the side of the house. Their addendum states that no grills, except electric, are allowed on the deck, and all other grilling must take place in the gravel area at least 10 feet from the home and the deck.
Yep, and this is exactly what addendums are for. It's your space to be specific about your property rules and criteria. And another great example is about pets. This is where you would state your fees for pets. The breed, the size, the type of animal goes here, as well as any rules about how the animal is to be contained. So if you want dogs to be crated when the tenant is not home, or snakes to remain in a tank, or you only allow fish tanks up to 1 gallon, this is where any and all criteria and rules about pets should go. This is also important to know that this is exactly what addendums are for on single family homes versus apartment living. This is why addendums are specific to the property.
And it should also be stated if you allow pets that need vaccinations, they must provide the updated vaccination information each year for your files.
Yeah, that is a super important point. So, by California law, we must notify our tenants if we have pesticides applied to our property and by whom, the landlord or a service. This may seem like overkill, but the tenant needs to sign off and agree to this so they can't come back later and sue you if they or their pet develop an illness from the chemicals that have been applied. Another addendum that many rental property owners will use is one for appliances. If there are specific instructions for the use of appliances, like changing the air filters for the HVAC system, or if a washer and dryer are provided, but all repairs fall to the tenant if they choose to use those machines. It also might specify the use of additional appliances, like extra refrigerators or freezers. Appliances can be anything from small countertop ones like air fryers and crock pots to large ones like those additional freezers I just mentioned. If you do or don't provide portable air conditioners for tenants to use, you'll need to include parameters and instructions on the use of those as well.
So I quickly want to go through a few more addendums that we don't use often, but ones for you to consider. A daycare or home-based business addendum needs to be used if your tenants will be operating a business out of their home. Even if they will not have clients come into the property, they might have employees at some point. Those extra people who are not on the lease are an added risk. They might need to make some alterations to the property for machines or storage of merchandise as well. Chemicals may be a concern, so address how those are to be stored and disposed of, especially if they're a mechanic or a repair person. Additional insurance needs to be addressed in this addendum because your liability insurance will not cover any issues caused by a home-based business. If you are or are planning to implement a utility submetering program for your rental properties, you'll need to address the specifics of that in an addendum. Like we mentioned earlier, we're working on executing a RUBS program for our water, sewer, and trash that we currently pay for on behalf of our tenants. RUBS, or Ratio Utility Billing System, is where landlords can use the service to determine how much each unit has to pay when sharing a utility that does not have individual meters or invoices for. The state of California mandates that this notice be a signed agreement with each tenant. So we've begun to include in all our lease agreements that this program is not yet confirmed, but we have plans to by March 2024, and the tenants need to agree to this when signing their lease. So far, so good. No one is balked, and many just shrugged like, yeah, we're using it, so I guess we should pay our fair share.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned this in the last episode, but we're going to be doing a podcast all about our experience with this process. And we're going to be interviewing the CEO of a company that specializes in this service for smaller landlords like us, because most of these companies will focus on large complexes and corporate rental property owners. So we found a good one and we're going to give it a go.
Yeah, that should be a good one. I'm excited about learning something new, and it can save us what? We figured around $500 a month?
Yeah, something like that. The current cost is around $800, so it'll depend on how we structure the breakdown of what and how each tenant will pay and what portion that we decide we want to cover on that.
Right. Well, savings and savings, and I'll take it however we can at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where we just mentioned we're going to include our trash bills to be part of the shared cost with tenants, some cities have very strict rules about trash, like where it can be stored, how long garbage cans can remain on the street, and now in California, many cities have ordinances requiring residents to recycle and compost. We include the code for our dumpster along with PDFs describing how to sort trash, which are provided by our disposal company. Okay, where many rental properties do not have these on property, you should include an addendum for a pool or spa if your property has one. Note how it is to be cared for, or if you provide a service to come in for it, and if you require additional insurance for its use. Covers, fences, gates, safety, etc. should all be addressed in this addendum.
Yeah, we haven't had to use that one in quite a while. And my guess is there are pre-formatted versions that will cover most of the things that Kevin had just mentioned and that need to be stated.
Speaking of pre-formatted forms, I want to jump in here and tell a quick story about the lease that our property manager in Idaho was using. Now, I'm not throwing them under the bus or thinking we're better than them, but when we got a lease renewal notice that basically said the tenant had renewed their lease and they included a copy of the lease for our files, I reviewed it. I found a major discrepancy. There is criteria on their website and then written in the lease that basically says that once they receive a security deposit, it's non-refundable. Now, I realize that Idaho is pretty landlord friendly. However, as realtors and property managers ourselves, with well over 20 years of experience combined, I know enough that many and most states have pretty specific laws about security deposit refunds. So I took a minute to Google it, and sure enough, right there in black and white, Idaho's security deposit law states you can only retain a security deposit for reasons agreed upon in the lease, and you must describe what damages or past due rents the security deposit was used for and the amount spent. It also states that notification of this amount must be sent to the tenant within 21 days of moving out. So we contacted our property manager to inquire about this criteria and request that it not be used in any of our marketing for our ads, or any verbiage about not receiving security deposits back be removed from our leases.
Okay, so one part Kevin is leaving out is that when we first met with this property management company after we purchased the property, we asked if we had any control over the lease. And the answer was a serious, flat no. And we won't get into the nuts and bolts right now. We have an episode all about what questions to ask property managers coming up soon, and we'll go into more detail then. But the message he's trying to convey is that if you're using a random lease or one that has been provided by your property manager that has not been reviewed or written specifically for the state where your rental property is located, you need to have a lawyer check it out for accuracy. Not all states require property managers to have a real estate license, a broker's license, or any certification at all on landlord-tenant laws. There is no requirement for knowledge of how to create these legally binding forms, nor is there education needed to know how to manage rental properties for others. And Idaho was one of them.
Exactly. According to the Idaho Real Estate Commission, the state of Idaho does not regulate property managers, homeowners associations, or even home inspectors. So, what can you do to cover yourself if you don't have a state-specific lease? Like we have mentioned before, we recommend easy landlord forms and their state-specific leases. But we'll talk more about them in a minute. Let's get back to the addendums.
All right, we only have 2 more to go and we are done. If the tenant is using someone to guarantee the lease, you should include an addendum stating who it is, to what capacity they are responsible for the tenant, which is usually only financial, and when their guarantee of the lease is to end. So, when you have a lease guarantor, they're signing their own agreement to financially guarantee that rent will be paid on time and that they will cover any unpaid damages that occur to the rental property. This addendum is for the tenant to sign an agreement that they understand the terms and conditions of that guarantor agreement that was signed separately from their lease. Finally, the last and likely the most important form, the blank addendum form, is used for any and all information you need to provide or have the tenant agree to that is not covered in any other part of the lease. So, this is important if you have restrictions on something like how many holes you want in the walls or the maximum size of hole that they can put to hang things without being charged a fee. And this may sound silly, but with people hanging their TVs up on the wall, those brackets can cause some pretty big holes. If they don't hit a stud and have to use an anchor, those holes are even bigger. And our walls in our apartments are textured, so patching them is a real pain. Which, sideline here, is why we give our tenants one free 3M claw picture hanger to try out with their welcome gift, because they barely leave any holes. Our tenant that had just moved out had bought them to use for a bunch of stuff, and we had trouble finding the holes to patch afterwards. So we'll link those in the show notes so you guys can check them out. Even if it's just for your personal home, they're a really helpful product. Okay, so back to the blank addendum. This blank addendum is where you'll put instructions, rules, restrictions, etc. for anything that is not already covered. It can be where you put specifics in for an additional deposit as well. This form is your fail-safe. Use it.
When it comes to important forms, that blank one would easily be in the top 3. So, in our last episode, we talked about where we get our forms. For our California properties, we are licensed realtors, so we use forms from the California Apartment Association. We could use forms by the Realtors Association, but those can be somewhat limited. What we recommend to everyone who does not have access to great legally evaluated forms is to use Easy Landlord forms. For those of you who are not familiar with them, Easy Landlord Forms is owned and operated by other rental property investors just like the rest of us. They sell most every form a landlord may need, from state-specific leases, addendums, notices, and lease term change forms. They offer over 200 forms for free when you sign up for your account. But if you use our link and code STACY15, they're offering 15% off any new form purchase. And here's why that's important. They have a monthly membership where you pay $12 a month and download any form you may need at any time. You can prepay the annual amount at $75 and get a discount off the monthly rate. It drops it down from $12 to $6.25 a month when you do that. Now, for those of you who want to secure forms and not get nickel and dimed each month, they now offer a lifetime membership for $399. But they are allowing our listeners to get any new purchase, including the annual or lifetime fee, at 15% off. We will add a link in the show notes as well as our code STACY15, that's Stacy with an IE and the number 15.
All right, before we finish up here, I have a couple tips regarding leases. When you have your tenants sign the lease, have them initial the bottom of every single page that does not have a signage line. And this is why. By initialing each page, it is their acknowledgement that they have read and understand what is on that page. So here's the deal. On leases, not every page has a signage line on it. For the main body of the lease, ours is 21 pages. The signage page for the main lease is not until the last page of those 21 pages. We then have addendums that are added onto those 21 pages, bringing our lease up to 37 pages. And we have the tenants initial any page of the addendums as well that don't have a signage line. And I know that sounds insane, but California is a highly litigious state and the tenants have a lot of rights, in some cases more than the landlords. So our lease is comprised of every legal way we can protect our property and our business. The other thing we do whenever we sign a lease, whether it's in person or electronically, is we sign in blue ink or the color blue. Why? Because the contents of the lease will mostly be in black ink, which makes it very easy to alter. When someone photocopies blue ink, it comes out much more faded, whereas black stays solid and dark. And so, when someone tries to alter a lease and then say that's your signature in the agreement, you can show the courts the original, which is preferably signed in person and not electronically, to prove that their altered lease indeed is not the original. This is much harder to prove with black ink. And listen, the chances of dealing with someone who's going to try and alter the lease is slim to none. But we do know a couple people who have had this happen. Pay attention next time you have to sign any legal documents yourself. They're usually with blue ink. Lawyers, title companies, notaries, and realtors usually are going to hand you a blue pen to sign with. And if you use DocuSign, they have an option to select the color you want to sign in. So select blue if you do use this service.
I really never noticed that until you brought it to my attention a couple years ago. And it's funny, now I notice it all the time.
I know. It's crazy. Everyone else will now too.
Okay, a quick reminder to email us any questions you might have for our question and answer episode that we'll be doing soon. Our emails will be linked in the show notes.
All right. Well, that is our show for today. We know these last 3 episodes have been packed with a lot of information about leases and addendums. If you like what you hear, would you help us spread the word? Tell your landlord friends or share our posts on your social media or leave us a review. We are humbled and grateful for each and every one of you. We hope you're gaining confidence and structure in your rental property business and will continue to tune in each and every week to listen to our episodes. From the bottom of our hearts, Kevin and I thank you. And until next time, you've got this, landlords.